History is loud about empires, but it whispers when Africans chose dignity. There is a place in Georgia where water remembers what books tried to forget. This is not a story of defeat. This is a story of refusal. This is Igbo Landing. By 1803, the transatlantic slave trade had already stolen millions of African lives. Bodies moved like cargo. Souls priced in ledgers. The Igbo people of southeastern Africa, present-day Nigeria, were known for something dangerous. They resisted. Slave traders described them as unruly. What they meant was this: the Igbo refused to accept slavery as fate. They carried a spirit of independence that could not be chained. Even when their bodies were bound, their minds and souls fought for freedom. They were a people who understood that to live without dignity was not to live at all. This deep-seated belief in their own humanity would soon lead to one of the most powerful acts of defiance in the history of slavery. In the spring of 1803, approximately 75 Igbo captives were purchased in the Caribbean. They were not fresh from Africa, but had already been broken once by the brutal Middle Passage. Now they faced a second journey into bondage. They were placed aboard an American schooner called the York, owned by wealthy Georgia planters John Coor and Thomas Spaulding. Their destination was the sprawling plantations on St. Simon's Island, Georgia. Their future was intended to be one of lifelong, back-breaking labor. The journey was short, but for the Igbo on board, every moment was a step closer to a life they refused to accept. The salt air and the sound of the waves were a constant reminder of the ocean that had separated them from their home, and the water that would soon become their final battlefield. Somewhere near the Georgia coast, something happened that plantation records never expected. The Igbo rose up. They methodically overpowered the crew members, a testament to their organized resistance. According to historical accounts, the slave traders were thrown into the water, their authority shattered in an instant. For a brief, powerful moment, the ship was theirs. They had reclaimed their freedom on the very vessel meant to deliver them to a life of servitude. But their victory was short-lived. A York ran aground near Dunbar Creek, trapping them between the land of their captors and the water that represented both their past and their future. Freedom was tantalizingly close, but so was death. The choice they were about to make would echo through history. The Igbo were forced onto the shore, and here, in this liminal space between water and land, history breaks. Because instead of scattering and running for the woods, instead of begging for mercy, they made a choice that terrified slaveholders for generations. They turned as one toward the water. Witnesses later recounted that they walked together into the creek, their voices joined in song, prayer, and chants in their native language. Some say they believed the water would carry them back home to their ancestors, back to a freedom beyond the reach of chains. This was not an act of despair. This was an act of profound spiritual resistance. They were choosing their own destiny, asserting their autonomy in the most absolute way possible. Their bodies belonged to them, and they would not surrender them to bondage. In Igbo cosmology, water is not just an element. It is a sacred boundary between the world of the living and the world of the spirits. It is a pathway, a portal. The Igbo did not drown themselves because they were weak or had lost hope. They walked into the water because they refused to be owned. They chose a spiritual homecoming over a physical enslavement. Their bodies were claimed by Dunbar Creek, yes, but their spirits escaped the plantation economy forever. In that moment they transformed the tools of their oppression, the water that carried them away from home, into a final, undeniable act of liberation. They left an indelible message. A soul that chooses its own freedom can never truly be conquered. We do not know their names. This is not because they didn't have them, but because the institution of slavery actively refused to write them down. In the ledgers of their captors they were listed as cargo, as financial losses, as a business inconvenience. Their humanity was systematically erased, reduced to numbers on a page. This silence is not an accident. It is a fundamental part of how slavery operated. By denying people their names, their stories, and their identities, the system attempted to deny their very existence. But what is erased from paper can never be erased from memory and spirit. The void left by their names speaks volumes about the cruelty they faced and the power of their final act. White Christian society at the time called the act madness, a product of heathen despair. They couldn't comprehend a choice that valued spiritual freedom over physical life under their control. But for other enslaved Africans, the message was crystal clear. They understood something profound. A faith that preaches obedience without demanding justice is not a religion, but a weapon of control. At Igbo Landing, the enslaved rejected a version of God that was used to justify their bondage. In their final moments, they reclaimed their own spiritual authority, turning not to a master in the sky, but to the promise of liberation with their ancestors. They chose a God that represented freedom, not one that sanctioned their chains. Igbo Landing was never erased from black memory. While official records fell silent, the story survived. It lived on in whispers, shared in the secrecy of slave quarters. It was woven into the melodies of spirituals and the rhythms of work songs. It became a powerful folk tale passed down through generations of the Gola Geechee people, the descendants of enslaved Africans in the coastal Lowcountry. For them it was both a haunting warning and an empowering promise. It served as a reminder that you can steal a person's body, you can steal their labor, but you can never steal their right to choose dignity. The water at Dunbar Creek became sacred ground, a place of pilgrimage and remembrance. Today, Igbo Landing asks a question that still unsettles the world. What chains remain in our own lives because we believe that walking away is too difficult, too costly? The memory of those 75 souls challenges us to look at our own forms of bondage, whether they are mental, emotional, or societal. The water remembers their choice, and so must we. Live awakened, live with purpose, live limitless, and don't forget to follow limitless living for more untold history.